And good evening, everyone. My name is Gilbert, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Rufi Thorpe in conversation with Cynthia Sweeney discussing Rufi's book, The Knockout Queen. We are so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this uncertain time. Vroman's Live will continue to host virtual events, and you can learn more about them on our website as well as our social media. Our next event is this Friday, May 15th at 6 p.m. with Ishmael Bea discussing his book, Little Family. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. Now, this evening's virtual event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button, which is done over here at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We will try to answer as many as the time will allow. Also, if you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's featured book, as well as the most recent book from our interviewer, you can go ahead and click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. The link will direct you to our website where you can continue the checkout process. With that being said, let me introduce our guests for this evening. Cynthia Sweeney is the New York Times bestselling author of The Nest, which has been translated into more than 25 languages and optioned for film by Amazon Studios with Jill Soloway producing. She will be interviewing Rufi Thorpe, who has received her MFA from the University of Virginia in 2009. Her first novel, The Girls from Corona Del Mar, was longlisted for the 2014 International Dylan Thomas Prize and for the 2014 Flaherty Dunnan First Novel Prize. Her second novel, Dear Fang with Love, was published by Knopf in May 2016. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to them. Let me just welcome you guys. Thank you so much doing this for Vroman's. We really appreciate it. There you go.
Thank you for having us here.
I'm the only one who can clap, I guess. This is a burden to be holding the applause for everyone, but I'll try and do my best. But Rufi, you're going to talk about the book.
Yeah. So one of the things that's hard about sort of giving the summary of this book is that the first major plot point is a spoiler. So instead, I think what kind of works is to talk about the characters. So it's predominantly about the friendship between two high schoolers, Bunny, who is 6'3" and 200 pounds by the end of high school and a star volleyball player, and whose dad is a rich real estate agent around town, and Michael, who's her next door neighbor and who's moved to the town to move in with his aunt after his mother goes to prison, and who works at Rite Aid after school and gets straight A's and has a secret Grinder account. And it wouldn't seem like they have much in common, but they kind of have everything in common.
I love that that's how you started, because how I wanted to start was by telling the story of the first time I heard you talk about this book. And we sort of came together because I had been complaining on Twitter that I wished I had a writer's room to bring like plot problems to, like not to workshop stuff, but just to say like, I don't know how to get these characters from point A to point B and just, you know, to get people's input. And that led to us getting together for lunch with our friend Jade Chang. But I remember so vividly, you said on Twitter, I want this book to be tight, tight, tight. Like I want it to be like the greatest screenplay where like every part fits and you know, there's nothing extraneous there. And then we met for lunch and you started describing a novel that had like 5,000 plots in it. It was like, and then she does that, and then this happens, and there's a realtor, and there's arson, and there's this, and there's that, and someone's in jail, and someone's in. And I thought, like, I just sat there in awe because I think maybe at that point, I don't know how much you'd written, but at least 100 pages, I'm going to say.
I've been like writing and rewriting the same bad 50 pages for a while.
Right.
That's like kind of how I go.
And I felt like, you know, I'm a kind of writer who is really typified by that Yale doctoral quote about writing, which is it's like driving at night in the fog and you can only see as far as your headlights, but that's all you need to get there. And I feel like you have this super zoom floodlight on the moon and you are looking 500 miles ahead and you're not even seeing just what's in front of you, but like everything around you. And what I wonder, especially when I read the book, which was in fact a perfectly tight package, beautifully, there was nothing that didn't need to be there, was whether you have to like edit your very feverish imagination or whether you just have a gift for making everything work.
Well, I mean, I definitely have a feverish imagination. That's a fair character.
I mean, I say that with the deepest respect.
Oh. But I don't, so with this one, yeah, I mean, I think that part of why I became a novelist to begin with is because I found it very vexing. The basic mechanics of how stories work were not natural to me, and I didn't understand. And I'm like, what do you mean a beginning? A beginning? How can you tell? Like anything could be a beginning. I mean, do you just start when someone's born? Like, how do you know what's the beginning, and how do you know what's the end? And how do you character arcs were very confusing to me. None of it made sense, and that's part of why I loved it and fell in love with it. And so I think that plot has always been, whatever the difference is between plots and events, I think that I'm super interested in characters. And so I'm really interested in their backstories and really interested in how their viewpoints change over time. But I'm not as interested in the Rube Goldberg machine of cause and effect. And so I think that part of what makes it feel like there's so much plot is because there's actually deceptively little plot and so many backstories. Because I love going into backstory and dreaming up, characters is my favorite part.
And I know that you started this book with, I think Bunny was the narrator, right?
Yeah, I started writing it from Bunny's point of view, and she just could not, everything that was happening for her was just pain. It was just like a puppy getting hit in the face. She didn't have any perspective, and she didn't understand how to teach the reader how to love her. She just was not an apt first person narrator. And I mean, it makes sense. I think she's sort of one of those larger than life figures. Like, Jay Gatsby couldn't have told The Great Gatsby. Sophie can't tell Sophie's Choice. Like, you need sort of a focalizer. And so Michael was that. And once I found him and his voice, then the whole novel just had a real propulsive force and started to be really fun to write and to all click together.
I love Bunny so much, as you mentioned, the 6'3", 200-pound volleyball player. Can you talk about how you conceived of her? Because, well, she's so present on the page, and she's so unique and bold and lovable and damaged. And so if you could just talk a little bit about Bunny.
Where she came from. So I wrote a book called Bunny Lampert 10 years ago before I published The Girls from Corona Del Mar, before I published anything. And it was a collection of interconnected short stories in which she was a peripheral character. And it was sort of supposed to be this negative space portrait. And that character was very much based on, I was at like a party in Brooklyn, and there was this female boxer there who, I don't know if she was on drugs or if it was just traumatic brain injury, but she was really out of it. And she had a boyfriend who was like kind of her caretaker, but the whole thing seemed really scary. And basically she just like haunted me for, decades. And so I've been thinking about the idea of this woman. Now, I didn't even have a conversation with that girl boxer at that party. So in no way is Bunny a portrait of her. But I do think that she became sort of this little pebble in my mind that I kept kind of coming back to and worrying.
I think the thing that is so intriguing and exciting about Bunny is that she can do something that most women can't do. And she has a power that most women don't have, no matter how hard you work out or how many steroids you take, the chances that someone who lives in a female body is able to cold cock a man is small. And Bunny just has this tremendous power, and I'd love for you to talk about that.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it's definitely wish fulfillment and fantasy and the dream of having that kind of physical power. As a woman, I think, or at least I learned kind of in my 20s when I then all of a sudden was in a bad relationship where suddenly I was trying to grapple with a man. I always knew men were stronger, but it was very theoretical. Like I knew they had their own like separate Olympics, you know. But I just didn't get it how completely my will was circumscribed by my ability to enforce it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the older I got, as I tried to sort of understand what being a woman entailed and why we had historically been chattel and like what that dynamic consisted of, I came to the conclusion that a lot of it had to do with our physical weakness, and that really it sets the stage for a lot of the other dynamics. And so Bunny is this fantasy of what if that weren't so. And you know, as much as I may dream of physical power, I'm also really glad that I don't have to punch someone in the face in a bar if he talks to me wrong, or go and join the army, or any of those other sort of duties of violence that men are expected to perform. And so I think that that's part of how the story came into being in my mind, was thinking not only about all the positives of having that kind of physical power, but also all of the consequences and responsibilities of having that much physical power.
Yeah, I was curious if writing in that point of view, writing in the, I don't know if you do write in Bunny's point of view, but certainly writing about Bunny, someone who has that kind of power, if it changed the way you felt. Like, did it change that frustration at all?
Well, I mean, no, I think I've always been in denial about, because I was really tall and big as a child, and I haven't grown since I was like 10. So I was just a gigantic fifth grader. And then I'm just like 5'4" with everybody else. And
That's so funny. That happened to me too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like I was a really tall little kid, first grader.
I know. Well, so then my son's doctor, because she was like predicting how tall he would be when he grew up, and she's like, well, he'll be this height. And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, who knows? Because, you know, people grow at all different rates. She's like, no, it's like very clear. And I was like, well, I mean, I didn't grow since I was 10. She was like, did you start your period when you were 10? And I was like, yes. And she was like, were you overweight? And I was like, yes. And it was this whole, evidently that's what stopped it, is your menses then makes you stop growing, which I hadn't known.
Wow.
Talk about those things being interconnected, though.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah,
getting way off topic here, I realize. But I don't know that Bunny really changed the way that I felt about it. I think that Bunny breaks my heart because yes. I think she is so unable to dissemble. She is so honest. Her reactions are true. And she's authentic. And I feel like in that way, she's sort of childlike and tender and vulnerable. And so maybe I think the biggest thing she taught me was to accept those qualities in myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a lot of Michael in me.
I mean, don't you feel, I feel like I always have or I feel like every character in my book, some have more of me than others, but everybody's got some of me.
Oh yeah, it's just me wearing 1,000 masks and
exactly.
costumes and yeah.
I mean, that's the fun part.
Yes, that's the whole fun part.
Yeah. If someone asked me what this book was about, not the plot, but like what I thought it was about, what I think it's about is, what do you do when someone you love makes a bad choice, or when you love someone who seems bound to make a series of terrible choices or does something bad? Is that how you thought about it?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think I started with the idea of exploring female violence and sort of the body. And then that led me to thinking about sex and violence and sex as both being sort of these on the spectrum of different kinds of touching. And I guess that for me, I kept coming back to shame and punishment. And there's so many ways in which Michael is struggling to, I mean, he's acting almost as Bunny's lawyer, trying to defend her to the reader, you know, and at times
Right.
he's anxious to lay out her best side so that we can forgive him for loving her. But he himself is not sure how much to judge her. And when it looks like she's not going to be punished by the world, he thinks she should be judged more harshly. And when it looks like she is going to be horribly punished, he thinks that it doesn't work. And so a lot of it became also about like, well, how do we hold each other accountable? What do we want out of punishment? And what if we're never going to get it out of punishment?
I just realized as I was listening to you that the thing I said I thought your book was about is the thing that not only is the book I'm writing about, but the thing that my other book is about. And I'm like, oh. Oh, this must be what it's about, right? The thing that I seem to only be able to write about.
No, but I think it's the same thing. It's just like the personal level of that is how do you deal with loving someone who's bad? I mean, and that is something I write about over and over again, too. It's one of my most basic human confusions.
Right.
And I think like the character that is my favorite for that, and this is Bunny's dad, Ray Lampert.
For sure.
Such an asshole. I mean, just like a really terrible person. And weirdly likable.
Yeah.
And what do you do? He's your dad, you know? Like
I know.
Where do you draw that line with somebody?
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about high school because obviously these two characters from most of the book are in high school. And, you know, it made me think about high school, which I haven't in a very long time, and how it's just a place where you are so ill-equipped to know who you are. It's the time of your life when it's impossible to know who you are, but it's also probably the most intense time in your life when everyone around you is trying to sort you and put you somewhere. And so you're frantically like trying to figure out where you go, like where you belong. And I know that you had a slightly unconventional high school experience, but I just can't help but wonder about your high school experience. Like, what was sophomore high school Rufi like?
Oh my gosh, I was so weird. Well, I was a theater kid, and I was, yeah, you too. And well, both my parents were actors. My dad still is. And so I sort of like grew up in the theater, so it made sense to do in high school. And I was really big into wearing pants and dresses at the same time. And I don't know, we made letters on typewriters and hid them in all the air ducts of the buildings. Like we were just like very nerdy and very weird.
And very creative.
And very creative, yeah. And I was just very, I was the kind of teenager who was like in a lot of anguish, even though there was really not very much wrong with my life. Right. Probably like a strong antidepressant would have been a good idea. But so I was very like moody and very emotional, and books and writing and literature sort of provided this connection that I didn't feel like I connected with anybody very well. Right. And I think for me, high school too was a lot about, I think that's part of why I put the RuPaul's Drag Race as something that Michael and Bunny bond over. And there's something about watching the art of taking apart and then putting back together in novel ways all those aspects of femininity. And high school is this time where you're trying to figure out how to put on makeup, trying to figure out how to dress, trying to figure out, do I want to be this person or this person? And it's all a disguise, and and at the same time, you're like helplessly, obviously yourself. Like you can't fool anybody.
I know.
And
it's so like pathetic, but it's also so touching and tender, like how much you are yourself. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school where everyone wore a uniform, and it didn't matter. And that was supposed to be the great equalizer. And that, There are uniforms for other reasons that were mostly great, but everyone was who they were in that light blue sack.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to see what else other people want to ask you. But this is the third book you've published, and I'm curious if your process changes from book to book, or if there are things that you learn in the writing of one book that you carry to the next.
For sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that I was trying to do in this book that was different was take longer making the decisions. I think that I tend to sketch in a bunch of decisions real fast just so that I can hold it still in my mind and start moving around in it. But sometimes those decisions are not good or informed decisions that I've made. And so kind of staying.
And it's so hard to undo them. I feel like it's so like once you make a choice, and it's not even about having to rewrite. It's just that in your mind, you've fixed that way. And I've had the experience where, an editor or someone has said to me, well, I don't think this should work that way. And I realized I'm God. I can rewind,
I can control this. Yeah.
and change it. But somehow that doesn't always, it doesn't feel that way.
For sure. I mean, I think that your way of writing with the highlights in the fog has a built-in slowing mechanism.
It sure does.
And I'm a very sketchy, it's a much more like Jackson Pollock experience over in my Word document.
Yes.
And so I do a lot of exploratory writing and throwing things away and starting over. And I kind of just write like a million act ones until I feel like I've figured out who the characters are, and then I let it rip and go. And by that time, I've kind of figured out what the structure of the book is. And I think the biggest difference for this one really is that I was not alarmed that that's what I was doing, because I had decided that that's the way that I did it. Whereas before I was like, why am I struggling so hard with act one?
Right.
And we'll never come together. And so there's just like I'm in love with making novels. Like the act of braiding it together, the act of imagining it all. It's my absolute favorite thing to be doing. And so, I don't know. I just remember writing this book as being like an extremely joyful time.
Yeah. I remember it as being an extremely joyful time for you too. Like you were so happy when you were writing this book. And I love hearing a writer say, I love writing. I feel much the same on most days.
Yes, of course, there's days where you're like,
of course,
this is impossible.
Yes. Our friend Eden Lepucky has asked a great question. Can you talk about fictional North Shore and how it came to be? Why make up a place rather than base it on a real city? What did fictionalizing it give you? P.S. She loves you.
Oh, well, this is going to be a fun one to answer, but I also wanted to tell everybody else. So I am at the end of the night going to buy 3 books from Vroman's. And so I would love it if in the question part, can you guys recommend books for me to buy? And then I'll pick 3 of them at the end that I'm going to buy to support the bookstore. So North Shore, what happened was this. I had this idea of this character, right? Bunny Lampert. And then we were moving to El Segundo, and we were looking for a house. And there was this one real estate agent that represented like every single house, it seemed like. And it was just everywhere. And I just thought, I wonder who that guy is, And then I thought, I wonder what it's like to have that be your dad, because I had this sort of like image in my mind of like what it must mean to be representing this many houses. And then I had the idea that the daughter could be Bunny, this character that I had been dreaming about for so long, but who had not had this particular plot happen to her. And so I was just moving to El Segundo, and I felt like I didn't have any right to try and write a portrait of the town. I didn't know what El Segundo was like. I'd moved there like 4 weeks earlier when I started to write this book. And so naming it North Shore, I wanted it to signify like, this doesn't have to be El Segundo. Like if it's not, I'm not trying to say this is the way El Segundo is, but at the same time, using the map of a town and an actual place, it gives you, trying to make up an entire town and draw the maps and keep the streets straight in your head, that's like a whole other level. And so North Shore both is El Segundo and isn't El Segundo. There's lots of, for people who live there, it's like filled with, you know, references to restaurants and street names but none of the people are really, I didn't know anybody really in El Segundo at the time I was writing it.
I love this question. You write about the secret Grindr account so well, and I say that as a gay man who, as a teen, had a secret gay AOL account. It's such a specific experience. How did you capture it so authentically?
Well, I mean, I think that because I was confused about my own sexuality when I was in my 20s and was in a lot of denial about it. And so I lived my life as just completely, like I presented myself as completely straight, but then would go online and find women to have sex with. And so I think that it's really just with Michael, it's just a bit of gender bending more than anything else. And those experiences are like they have this fleeting and oddly like transcendent and yet like terribly depressingly banal character to them that I think is also kind of similar, honestly, to any online dating.
Let's see. Someone asked a question about switching narrators, but I think you answered that. Jenny, if you don't agree, just pop right back in here. And Anne asks, do you read your readers' reviews and what do you take away from them?
Well, I do read like my reviews in papers and stuff like that. I don't tend to go on Goodreads or Amazon because I know that my reaction to the negative reviews is not like in proportion to what's even being said. Like, I guess my basic feeling is that everybody has the right to irrationally love a book and the right to irrationally hate a book. And I don't feel like my books are for everybody or that everybody should like them. But it still is like you feel kind of panicky when you read somebody being like, I hated this. And people, you know, they're not thinking about you reading it. And so they don't write it in the same way that they would if they were going to say that to your face. And it feels like you feel almost like embarrassed, like you've walked in on someone naked, like you're not supposed to be reading it.
Right.
So I generally try not to go on those websites. What's happening now sort of is like I'm much more active on Instagram. And so then like I'm reading people's reviews on Instagram and I feel again this sort of, and then I feel kind of creepy. Like, am I supposed to like it? Or then is it like creepy that I'm like sleuthing my own book review? I don't know. I don't know where all those lines are.
It's very confusing. It's very confusing to be a writer on social media. And I would just say, if you tag an author in your Instagram review, it should be a good review. You said in an interview once that a friend told you you're a pretty good writer, but you're a dazzling rewriter. What is your revision process? How do you keep momentum when you have to basically start over or write from a new point of view, etc.? And someone else also asked what keeps you motivated as you write. So those kind of go together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the biggest secrets to rewriting is to open a new Word document. If you're looking at everything that you already wrote, you're going to not see anything wrong with it. I mean, there's no compelling reason to move small things. And so you're like, okay, well, that line's fine and that line's fine and that's okay. And you kind of keep going. And so the biggest thing for rewriting to my mind is to just start in a completely new document. And if you remember something from your previous draft, it's because it was good. And anything that you're going to forget to put in there, it's because it wasn't worth remembering. And so then that way is sort of like a mechanism whereby I try and sieve and kind of keep all my best moments and my best lines and my best characters. But I also think that, I don't know, I had a really wonderful creative writing teacher who was really influential for me named Raymond Ofsfeld. And he always would say, don't worry about it. Everything can be fixed later. And so I have like a very strong inner critic. And I think that's why when I'm actually writing, I have to turn it off entirely. And that's part of how the process is as chaotic and ridiculous as it is. So for me, there's a great deal of like, almost like I passed out when I'm writing, and then I like wake up and it's time to go get the kids at school, and then I have to paw through it and see if any of it was any good. And so I find being in that trance flow state of dreaming it and typing as I'm dreaming to be like extremely pleasurable. And I find trying to piece it together extremely pleasurable in a totally different, like meticulous kind of way. And so I think that you just have to allow yourself both modes, kind of.
Let me see. I learned a lot of new words when reading this book. Do you speak with as expansive as a vocabulary as you write with? I feel like I can answer this question. Yes, I think you do. I mean, not as, obviously, there are things that you would not say in conversational speech because you would seem like ridiculous. But yeah.
I mean, I think that I'm a big word nerd and I studied Latin in college, and like I will like recreationally like look up the etymology of words, and so I am fully that nerd.
I don't think we have any more questions here that I haven't answered, but if you guys have one, we have some more time, so feel free to chime in. And I'm wondering, a question that I love to ask writers once their book has been out in the world a little bit is whether or not the book that you have ended up talking about to and with people is the book that you thought you wrote, or if you have discovered anything new from readers.
It is, it's been kind of unreal, honestly, this book as compared to the other two, because it has felt like so much more of an intimate understanding. Like for the first time, the book people are talking about is very much the book I wrote, and it's like people suddenly have access to like my diary from when I was 10 years old or something. Like core Rufi problems and thoughts and like intimate insights are suddenly people are like interacting with them, and so it feels like it's I sort of feel like I've been sending signals into outer space all this time, and then I just started getting all these transmissions back. There's something like really emotional about it for me, and feeling like I managed to communicate some of those things that I've been trying to figure out how to communicate kind of my whole life. It feels really like fantastic.
That's so cool. And I'm sure everyone is curious to know how it has been for you, just events like this, and what it's like to release a book right now.
For sure. Well, I mean, I feel like I was lucky that it wasn't my debut or something. I've had friends publishing their debut right now, and you really want that. You want that moment to stand up in front of family and friends and be like, I did it. I'm a big, fancy, real writer now. Look, it's a book, And so I felt lucky that it was my third, and I didn't have as much kind of emotional investment in that part of it. And on the other hand, I mean, I was a little bit freaked out by the idea that I should like promote myself, because that's not like a natural position.
I know, it's the worst.
It's hard. But then I realized that I just like had to turn it into stuff I liked. And so I started making silly videos and trying to think of fun things that I could do that were amusing and that I could be kind of proud of, like little mini art projects kind of.
Right.
And that made it really fun. And then also I've gotten to like do events with so many writers that I wouldn't have because of geographical limitations,
Right.
and I've gotten to have conversations with writers I really admire, like you, although we both live in LA, so hopefully I was going to get to see you anyway.
Well, maybe you could hear the helicopter a few minutes ago, just in case anyone thought this was a fake LA backdrop. You're getting tons of book recommendations on the side comments. Did you see those? Yeah. So I'm not going to
Yeah, you
read
don't
them
have to go
all.
through them. I go through them
Yeah,
greedily at the
they're
end.
really great. Now's the time if you have a question to ask it. I have two more questions. So one is you're still talking about this book, so maybe this doesn't even make much sense, but like when you are done with a book, when you have to let it go, do you miss the characters? And if you do, who would you miss the most from the Knockout Queen? Like there's so many people in there I loved.
Yeah, I mean,
those characters when I was done. Like I was sorry that I couldn't read it again.
I feel like I do definitely miss them. And in a lot of ways, characters that you've lived with for several years become like these, imaginary friends kind of. And you don't feel like you created them. It's not like you're trying to admire your own handiwork or something. They feel like these real people. And so Bunny and Michael and Michael's voice and his way of seeing the world, I miss all the time. But I also miss like Miss Harriet, who runs the preschool.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
like even Anne Marie, who's sort of, I mean, she's not a villain. I don't know what you what you would call her. And like Naomi, like there's just so many, or even Aunt Dee Dee. Aunt Dee Dee's a weird one because she came from a book I wrote even before the book I wrote about Bunny Lampert. Like the second long thing I ever tried to write had a character named Aunt Dee Dee in it. And although that character had fibromyalgia, which I feel like Aunt Dee Dee is really just like one scene away from
super close. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't have enough fiction writing behind me to be thinking about going back and picking up old things, but do you do that a lot? Does that work a lot?
Well, I didn't think it's not like I didn't really plan it. I just sort of did it. It was like I knew he was living with his aunt, and then I guess as I was writing it, I was like, what if it was Aunt Dee Dee?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think especially because those books weren't published, they still felt, it didn't feel like those characters were set in stone. It didn't feel like they still felt like open questions.
Yeah, like they're out there in the universe, like
they're still like ghosts
tapping you on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the last question. Are you working on something new?
I am. I'm working on something new. I mean, I'm not getting anything done right now.
Of course.
There's no such thing as school or camp or anything like that anymore. But it's going to be kind of a departure for me. But I had been pushing the idea away for a long time and then thinking like, I can't do that. And then I was like, why not? Like, what's the worst that could happen? I write it and it's bad. Like I've done that before, So might as well try and write it and see what happens.
I am so curious to discover what is the thing that you felt was too out there for you to do.
Oh, it involves so it's more about mommies and having like mom friend groups of school age children. But then there's also like UFOs and time travel involved, and
I'm so down for time travel. There are two types of books I will always read no matter what: time travel and mermaids. So
mermaids.
Yeah.
I love mermaids too. Time travel is always interesting to me.
Oh, Gilbert's back.
Hello, Gilbert.
Hello.
I just want to say before we wind up, like you guys wrote so many lovely things on this, on the little comment page, and it's really exciting. It's weird for me. I've never done this before, and it's really cool to see how it works. And this has been a blast. So thank you all for showing up and saying something nice. It says right there on the prompt.
No.
Well, I thank you so much to the both of you for doing this and for letting everybody kind of be a part of this and listen in on a really great conversation. and thank you to everybody who's joined us by watching. And yeah, and these comments are always great. I love seeing the engagement from the community and people who are clearly our people, our book people. So so Rufi, congratulations. Thank you so much. I know we talked about it before we went on, but we really look forward to having you back in the store once that is possible.
That would be very fun.
And Cynthia, thank you so much. I know you've been there before too, so I mean, we just want everybody.
Always happy.
We just want everybody. We want everybody back. You know,
Campaign.
it's tough right now, but
yeah.
but until then, everybody, please continue to join us for these Vroman's live events. Don't forget, down there at the bottom of the screen, there's a green button. It says purchase the Knockout Queen and the Nest. So it will take you to our event page on vromansbookstore.com, where at the bottom of the screen, you'll have both Rufi and Cynthia's books there. You can click on that and order it. Vroman's is open for curbside pickup now, as of at the end of last week. So I know we have some in stock, so you can order for that if you're in the area. If not, you can still order from there, and you can have it shipped to you. So once again, thanks so much, and make sure to follow us here on Crowdcast. And Rufi, Cynthia, have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much
for having us.
All right, bye.
Bye.